Hey, welcome everybody. Random Acoustic Thoughts here. I got a special guest, Josh City from 86 Boxing, here to talk about the great Sam Langford fight in 1911, Australian Bill Lang. 86, what's up?
Okay, what's going on, Random? Per use, all is good, just happy to be here to get a quick discussion in on a historic fighter in one of the rare films we do have of Sam Langford. So, looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's great to have you, man. Yeah, we're just kind of winging this, folks. I'm a tiny bit under the weather, but we plow forward. And yeah, we just want to talk about this fight. We only have parts of three Langford fights surviving on footage. And so, obviously, this is a just thing we're dealing with. We just want to go over and have a take a look at it. At this time, Langford was chasing Jack Johnson, the heavyweight champ, but Johnson was this was after he'd had his super fight with Jim Jeffries, and he didn't fight this year. But 1911 was a very busy year for the other great heavyweights of that era: Sam Langford, Joe Jeanette, and Sam McVeigh, principally. These three guys were very busy in this time, even though they couldn't get a Johnson fight. There they are. Jeanette on the left, McVeigh in the middle, Langford on the right. So before we dig into Langford specifically, Josh, you want to talk just a little bit about? So we know that Bill Lang fought and lost to Jack Johnson in, I think you said, 1907, and actually they fought in the rain. How about that? But just want to talk about Bill Lang's career from the time he lost to Johnson and through his fight with Tommy Burns, and then leading up to the Langford fight.
Good to go. Yeah, so Bill Lang is one of those names who isn't one of the marquee stars, but certainly a tough contender from the time. We're talking early 1900s, so as Random pointed out, in 1907, he fought Jack Johnson, losing a knife round TKO. And keep in mind, for Lang, this was probably around 10 fights into his career. So that's no doubt a tough challenge. And he, much like a lot of the other top guys or anyone of snuff during that time, had to be or had to go through a lot of stiff competition in the early portion of their career, leading up to the points where they could get into contention. So for him, it was no different story. And Australia, in all actuality, has long been one of those locations that had a lot of great fighters at varying points. Many who were standouts, many who had the capability of being world champions in their respective divisions. So Bill Lang, he's one of those guys who was in the heavyweight division, which, as we know, is the marquee division in boxing. And despite being match tough, he was able to do some pretty solid things in the sport. Through 1907, he ended up taking on a guy by the name of Peter Felix, who is the cousin of the great Black Prince Peter Jackson. Now, if you know Black Prince Peter Jackson, he's one of the top heavyweights from a little bit before this particular time frame or this particular decade in the 1900s. He was came to prominence more so in the late 1800s, and he was probably at his best during the 1880s up to the very early 1890s. But this is the cousin of Peter Jackson, a guy by the name of Peter Felix, who Bill Lang was able to defeat on a few different occasions between 1907 and 1908 as he continued to push forward on an 11 fight win streak after that loss to Jack Johnson. And this led him to what was a world heavyweight title fight against the champion at the time, the little giant from Hanover, Tommy Burns. Of course, many will know Tommy Burns from his fight with Jack Johnson. Hence, this was the reason Jack Johnson was able to win the world heavyweight title. Just so happened to be in Australia, of course. But yeah, Tommy Burns would end the 11 fight win streak of Bill Lang in 1908 on September 3rd, getting a 6 round stoppage or knockout, actually. And we were talking about Tommy Burns a little bit earlier offline, and he's one of those guys who had a pretty decent run given his makeup being one of the smaller heavyweights, being about 5'7", and generally weighing in that 170, 180 range. He was actually a traveling heavyweight, a traveling champion, and he would go from place to place putting his title on the line. So that's one of those sort of key things about Tommy Burns, who is more known for the loss to Jack Johnson, of course, but he actually had a pretty decent career given the odds against him being on the smaller side, competing in the heavyweight division. And he actually has a pretty decent amount of footage out there where we get to see him actually apply his trade. And yeah, he's one of those fighters that will continually be mentioned as we go through the annual annals of history. So Bill Lang ended up competing with Tommy Burns, of course, taking that loss. But Lang overall, he was fairly tested as far as his competition throughout the course of his career. And while he wouldn't get another shot at the world heavyweight title, he certainly made a name for himself and was able to do his thing as the Australian heavyweight champion. And one of the premises of this video, of course, is to actually discuss his fight with Sam Langford, one of the rare surviving films we have of both Sam Langford and Bill Lang. So we had the pleasure of being able to watch both of them compete and get a feel for their styles. And we just get to see the greatness of one Sam Langford.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, he came through. He found some success in the. Let me just pull up his record here. Yeah, so Burns had gone through guys like Felix. He'd beaten. He'd lost to Tommy Burns. He went 20 rounds though with the champ, and then he did get the win over an older Bob Fitzsimmons. But Fitzsimmons was dangerous past his youth. I mean, that was a famous thing about Ruby Rob. And he found some success, I guess. After the second loss to Tommy Burns, he dropped a 6-rounder newspaper decision. Al Kaufman came back against Salinas Jack Burns. And then to start out his 1911, he got DQ'd. So I guess I should mention, in England at this time, it was very easy to get disqualified. You hit someone when they were down, you were out. So if you watch certain other boxers' highlights and you'll see them put that last shot in, that would be a DQ back in the time in the English, in the reffing, in a way that it's just part of someone's highlight now. But you see a lot of like late hits and things. They were very stringent about that. When Langford was going over, he'd fought in England before in 07 against Tiger Smith for the English middleweight championship. He didn't get the fight that was scheduled for after that with Gunnar Moore, who was the English middleweight champ. Moore declined to fight him. Then Moore lost to Iron Haig. And then Langford actually went over a fight. He was the night he was supposed to fight Jack Johnson in England. After Johnson had beaten Tommy Burns, he actually fought Iron Haig instead for the English heavyweight championship and beat him. So he'd fought in England before. He was used to the rule set. Here he is back in the UK. He's fighting Bill Lang. Bill Lang's had some success, but like I said, Al Kaufman got a little bit the best of him, contender, sparring partner for Jack Johnson. He got a little bit the best of him. He had lost to Burns twice. Then he gets DQ'd after that rebound win. Now he comes in against the Langford fight. His promoter, Hugh McIntosh, promoted the event, Australian. Had high hopes for Bill Lang. And if beating Langford here, they were going to go to America. He was going to do, it would have been the big time for him, because even though Langford couldn't get a title shot because Jack Johnson wasn't fighting, he was a huge name. And this was the guy to beat. If you couldn't get at Johnson, this is the guy to beat. Let me give you folks, you find, folks, a sense of Langford's year overall. Boom, right here, 1911. So he's already beaten the great Joe Jeanette over 12 rounds in one of their meetings in the U.S. And then he went up to, that was actually in Boston. That was a great fight. And then he went up to upstate New York and beat Fred Atwater. And in that fight, he actually dropped his hands. The guy gave him several of his best shots before wading back in. I mean, Langford had a chin on him. It wasn't just technique and punching power off the charts, but he also had a chin to go with it, so he could take it. And he would do that to mess with people and entertain the crowd. Sometimes in his sparring sessions, Langford would drop his hands and let the other guys hit him. Like, he was really a special level of tough. So he's coming in February 21st. He's fighting Bill Lang in England, in London. Now, this was like I'm referring now to Clay Moyle's excellent book on Sam Langford, which I'd recommend everyone get. This was a big deal event, suit and tie. They did a thing the night before, like a catered event the day before. Langford appeared in a little sparring session with some kid. He was clowning around, letting some kid knock him out. Langford was a great entertainer. In fact, let me just read something from Clay Moyle's book. This is an article from the magazine Boxing, the English magazine. It says, whenever the boxing business sours on him, or even before it does, he can always feel pretty confident of getting as many music hall engagements as he wants. If he fails to secure all that he asks for, that will only be because the music hall engagements don't know a good thing when they see one. For Sam is a natural-born comedian, and his training stunts, for all their earnestness, are always full of humor. You can see it here. There's a crowd there. Everyone's dressed up, and they bring a little kid. I can't remember his name, Matthews maybe, but anyway, they brought him out. Langford lets him slap him around, and they all had a great time. But then the next day, it's dead serious business. Bill Lang has about 30 pounds on him. And Josh, you just want to speak briefly on giving up size. Like, you're aware of a lot of fighters throughout history, a lot of great fighters who've given up size, like Fitzsimmons and the original Joe Walcott, Barbados Joe Walcott. You want to just talk on a couple of those guys? Because this is something Langford was doing in this fight. He was not a particularly large guy. He's got about 30-pound deficit here. You just want to talk on that, about other fighters you feel are worth mentioning that did the same sort of, made these same sorts of climbs?
Indeed, yes. We've seen this through the annals of history where a lot of smaller fighters dared to be great as they rose in weight. Going back to the mid through late 1800s, we saw this. Um, just some of the more conventional names or names that those will be familiar with. Of course, you mentioned some. I think about the likes of Nonpareil Jack Dempsey, who was middleweight champion of the world, but he generally weighed in the 150-pound range, and he would be welterweight by certain standards as well. And he was someone who dared to fight opponents who were bigger, and through his career, he was considered to be unbeatable, hence his nickname, Nonpareil. You mentioned Bob Fitzsimmons, a man who dethroned actually the Nonpareil Jack Dempsey when he became middleweight champion. And Fitzsimmons, of course, we know he would go on to be the first three-division champion in the sport, winning the world light heavyweight title as well as the world heavyweight title. And throughout his career, even beyond then, he routinely fought a lot of guys who were much bigger than him. And he still was able to carry he was able to carry enough pop to do damage even against those bigger guys. You mentioned Barbados Joe Walcott at 5'1", a welterweight who was known to compete with heavyweights. We've mentioned in the past him knocking out Joe Chewinski, who made his name at light heavyweight, but fought up to heavyweight as well, and was a bigger guy than Barbados Joe Walcott. Chewinski is about 6'1", or somewhere around there, and just didn't stop Barbados Joe Walcott from being able to knock him out. And Barbados Joe was routinely in with guys who were much bigger than him. And being 5'1", He was often in with even guys who were just going to be taller than him on a regular basis. But to think of him being in there competing with the top guys at those higher divisions, and the list goes on. You have other guys who went through these same things, and Sam Langford, of course, who was the subject of this video, he routinely went in against guys who are much larger. It's pretty crazy to think that he started around lightweight and would rise all the way up to heavyweight. And not only that, one of his separating factors is his ability to carry that power. This is through technique and just his genetic makeup, which allowed for him to use his tools and advantages to best suit him, having longer arms for his height, um, being a thicker, having broad shoulders, more bulky type of stocky fighter. That was a trait that, or that was just a natural sort of given, or a natural genetic makeup that he had, and this allowed for him to actually stand out when he moved up in weight. It allowed for him to be able to absorb some of these bigger shots that he was taking from these larger guys, and he gradually worked his way from those lower weights to the heavyweight division, and he went about it in a systematic manner. And he was never a huge heavyweight, even at that, but he just knew how to utilize the tools that he had, the tools that he did have, and he was sure of himself for sure. And he understood what he was capable of, what he could do in the ring. And it's pretty amazing to think about what he was able to accomplish despite not getting a shot at the world heavyweight title. I think that what Langford was able to do speaks volumes when you really break down his resume and look at who he competed against. If you just look at the heavyweight piece of it alone, where, as mentioned, he was routinely the smaller guy, that in itself trumps the career of many fighters. Just what Langford was able to do competing at heavyweight, not to, that's not even taking into account the other feats that he had. But you have those rare fighters who are able to transition to varying weights. Langford is one of them. And I think that is a true measure of separating fighters, showing the greatness of a fighter. We see some of this today where fighters move up, but it's vastly different by comparison to today. You really don't even think that you'll see a lightweight. You don't even envision seeing a lightweight moving to heavyweight. And that's essentially what Langford was able to do during his time. It's not something we fathom these days, just very different. And the guys from that era had to deal with some tougher conditions, and thus it made men of them. And this is how they made their money. This was their trade. So you had to be willing to take a level of risk that you often don't necessarily see these days, just given the times and conditions. And Langford is probably the top guy in that regard. Think about him and the likes of Harry Greb. The types of things that make them stand out is their ability to take those risks and not only be successful, but there were points in which they would essentially dominate despite the disadvantages. And I think that's the true separating factor on why these guys, Langford, Greb, for two, get mentioned as the greatest fighters of all time.
Yeah, there's some great points right there, Josh. Yeah, because there have been so many great fighters. But then if you're trying to narrow it down within the greats, you start looking at the larger bodies of work. And that inevitably draws you to Langford and Greb's career, because you go, okay, so who's who's mixing at that Hall of Fame level, that like generational greats level the most. And of those people, who are the most successful? And that's how you end up with Langford and Greb, plus all their other work, all the other contenders and challengers. Like Langford fought dozens of fights against Hall of Famers and champions, but also against a lot of contenders like Bill Lang. And so, the veil of time sort of like just things recede into the distance. And so today, when someone fights a simple contender, if they're a good fighter, they get more credit than, say, back then. But this fight with Lang, this wasn't. I think Langford was a slight favorite. I think maybe 3-2 or something. But despite the size difference, he was a favorite. But that was based on his ability, even though he was giving up size, and even though Lang had like gone the distance with Tommy Burns when he was the champion. So the thing was certainly of a certain level. But shortly, I guess we'll get into the footage. But yeah, like you said, like Langford echoed that sort of that Barbados Joe Walcott, like I'll take on anyone. And in some ways, like here's a picture of Walcott. Walcott was a little triangle of muscle himself. Langford was just grew up into a bigger version. But they both had long arms compared to, I mean, Walcott was 5'1.5". So Langford was, half a foot taller or whatever, but he was in the same proportions, built on heroic lines, like cartoonishly buff for their height. But Langford also trained with like lighter fighters, especially like Jimmy Walsh. There he is, bantamweight Jimmy Walsh. He would still train with him. So he kept his speed. Like Langford had in his prime, and this would be included in his prime, this 1911 fight. He just had tremendous speed, but he also had timing and a sense of distance to let him like match the person doing it. Like he wasn't just like, I'm going to flurry and my speed is my calling card. But he could turn it up, and when he did, he was extremely fast. Some of his knockouts, the writers are saying you could hardly see what happened. It was just so quick because he had this great move where he'd go for the body and then he'd just whip up a left hook to the head. I think it was a trick that Georgie Byers, former colored heavyweight champion, showed him. That little combo, that little right-left, hitting on the half beat, like something you might see maybe like someone like Archie Moore, some of the cleverer fighters can sort of their sense of timing. They have like musician sense of timing. Langford was one of those guys, and those hooks. There's a hook on Bill Lang. And you can see the form. You can see the turn of the hip. And that Langford's on the balls of his feet. Like he's not just wailing away. He was an extremely gifted technician, but he was also just inordinately tough and had a frame that could just go all day. Here he is with two of his trainers at the time. There's George Byers in the center, and on the right there is Bob Armstrong, who himself was a colored heavyweight champion and trainer and sparring partner at the highest levels. And so these guys are guiding Sam. He's part of a lineage. And but he's fighting over here in the English rules. He's been there before, but he's had so many fights in his career by 1911. But he hasn't spent as much time under this rule set as others. I actually did a graphic a while ago. Here are some of his significant opponents in his career leading up to this fight with Bill Lang. I'll go very quick, top left to bottom right, very, very quick. Patsy Sweeney, the great Joe Gans, the great Jack Blackburn, Dave Hawley, Elbows McFadden, the great Barbados Joe Walcott, the Professor Andy Watson, young Peter Jackson, the great Joe Jeanette, the great Jack Johnson, Jim Barry, Big Sandy Ferguson. I think that's the Italian Bearcat. Gosh, why can't I remember his name? Anyway, bottom left, Jim Flynn, fireman Jim Flynn, contender. I think that's Al Kubiak next to him. There's Iron Haig, the English champ that he stopped. There's Dixie Kid, Mike Schreck, great Stanley Catchell, battling Jim Johnson, and Jeff Clark. That's not all the significant opponents, and some of those are multiple fights, but that's the kind of, and Langford debuted in 02. He had a slow 02. So the busy part of his career started in 03, January 03. And by 1911, he's already had like this incredible career, and he's still going to keep going into the 20s. But this is, and I won't dally on this too much, but I did want to mention, Josh, just like for the uninitiated, Langford fought a who's who from the lower weights like Patty Sweeney and Joe Gans, Dave Holly and McFadden at lightweight. Jack Blackburn, he fought at lightweight and welterweight. He also fought Dave Holly at welterweight, fought Barbados Walcott, one of the all-time great welterweights, 15 rounds to a draw. But also like young Peter Jackson, more of a middleweight size fighter, the great Joe Jeanette, a large middleweight turned heavyweight, or what would be a light heavyweight turned heavyweight. Jack Johnson. I mean, some of these guys are much bigger than him. Some guys are smaller and fast. He'd seen it all. He fought come forward battlers like Fireman Jim Flynn and big lugs like Big Sandy Ferguson, tough character, but not necessarily the most refined. Fought geniuses like Jack Johnson, Jack Blackburn, Joe Gans. Sort of unpredictable fighters like Dave Holly, more of grappling-oriented fighters like young Peter Jackson. I mean, he done so much. Battlers like Battling Johnson, the enormous like a tank, and then the great Stanley Catchell, jabber movers like Jeff Clark. I mean, it's really astounding what Langford had faced. And, this was the era of the white hopes, right? People are trying to find a white contender who can take if you'll excuse the term, this is just what the term that was used by certain writers. They'd say, take back the title for the white race. So there was a lot of racial politics. We don't get into that so much, just looking at the sporting reality. But in sporting terms, the sports fans wanted just the best to fight the best, and then stuff would get away. This Langford fought a who's who across racial lines. He fought great fighters like Stanley Catchell, as well as like the all-time great black fighters like Joe Walcott and Joe Gans. He'd seen everything, but he's up giving 30 pounds to this guy who can really go, and he's going the distance with Tommy Burns, with the champ. So they have the fight. Now this is like a suit. I forget if they build it for some sort of championship, but it's a suit and tie thing. This is the first fight in England that has significant amounts of women in attendance. And there's a military band for the walkouts. So they're having music that night too. And you can find out about this, folks, by ordering Clay Moyle's excellent book on Sam Langford, Boxing's Greatest Uncrowned Champion. If you ever buy one book, buy this book. It gives great stories and information about that. I have it open next to me right here. But I think, Josh, you think is it time for us to crank up the footage? What do you say?
Yeah, let's jump into it.
Cool. So this is the beginning of Langford. This is Langford's third fight of 1911. He's fought Joe Jeanette, Fred Atwater, and now he's fighting Bill Lang. He's gone over to London to fight Bill Lang. Bill Lang's second fight of the year. He's already been DQ'd in England, and now he's having his second fight. This is what Langford and his great contemporaries, Joe Jeanette and Sam McVeigh, the other key heavyweight contenders, this was what they ended up doing combined in 1911. So this is early in the year for them, early in the season. These are real seasons of boxing. And these guys, so even though Johnson on the left there wasn't fighting, the other three were going crazy in 1911. It was absolute madness, these all-time greats. So yeah, I'm gonna put up a neutral. Let's put up a neutral screen. Let's go into the footage here. I've got a little intro package. Here, there's Langford stretching out. You can kind of see his build, like he's a little triangle. There's him landing a left on Iron Hague. See him stretching out, doing his thing. He's used to being the smaller guy. It's not the only experience he's had. He's fought smaller fighters when he had the advantage, but he's used to being the smaller guy. This is nothing new. The rules is no clinching, no holding and hitting, especially. No hitting obviously went down. They're very much out in England at this time. I've seen that written in the newspapers. And Lang's, I think, 203 pounds. Langford's something like about 30 pounds lighter. Crazy shoulders and arms on a short man's body. That's what made him special. Or that's what partly gave him the opportunity to craft a skill set around his build. Just like, Josh, like Rocky Marciano, right? He wasn't especially small, but he had really short arms. So his whole style worked around that. Langford did the same thing, except he had a lot more experience than Marciano at the highest levels. A silly amount, even for this day when people had tough schedules. There's Langford, one of the training exercises he would do. Guys would come in, he'd push him off, but he would use that in fights. He'd push off. You can actually see it in the Jim Flynn fight, the third fight with Jim Flynn that we have on footage. Flynn tries to battle his way in. Langford pushes off, retreats a little bit, and launches some monster uppercuts. So I had a practical application. Okay, I think, and there he is with Bob Armstrong, Liver Davis, and Georgie Byers. I think that's from 1912. So let me pull up the fight here. Let's see what we got. Is this the full speed fight? I think this is it. Round one. So it's chopped up. We didn't get all, I think it's a 6-round fight. We didn't get it all. See Langford coming, he's got his right hand up to stuff. I tried to approximate some actual timing. It's a little tough. Hand crank cameras and the footage that's online is all sped up. This is, I forget, 70 something percent. See Langford throw that nice hook. But what you'll see is, obviously they're not hitting in the clinch here. So this is sort of like a clean roll. See Langford's holding his hand up too, like, you're not DQing me. But watch Langford's feet as he cuts the ring. See a little sidestep. You see how, like, for anyone, if you've seen Jack O'Brien footage, he does that sort of like that. He likes to move and then come in. Oh, they go at it a little bit. But Lang's generally trying to move and then come in with the damage. But it's just that Langford's screwing up his distance. And if Lang stops too long, he throws in the artillery there. He was feinting his left, brought in the overhand. It's hard to see at full speed Langford slipping some of these shots and some of the counters he's landing on the inside. You see, he's the smaller guy by far. They have the same reach, but Langford's, I think Lang was 6'1". Langford's like 5'7.5". They do have the same reach. And Langford, you know, a short guy like him with an epic granite head, you could definitely hurt your hands on the top of that head. So is anything standing out to you, Josh, here? I know I'm talking over the whole thing. Do you like what you see about from how drastically he's cutting the cage, even like going in a square stance to do it?
Yeah, that's probably the thing that stands out the most. It's just his ability to cut the ring off, which is something that a lot of guys go a career never really learning how to do so. And the seamless manner in which Langford is able to do it, I think, speaks volumes of just how good he was, the amount of skills he had, his IQ, his ring generalship, etc. And there's no question that Bill Lang respects the power of Langford, even with him being bigger and weighing more than Langford. He respects what Langford has to offer because, technically speaking, we know that Langford was one of the top all time, but he had a way of being able to throw and land his punches with just the right distance, just the right amount of torque, and he maximized his power. In Lang, you'll see it as he routinely backs away and never really wanting to get into an exchange with Sam Langford. So, yeah, that ability to cut the rings off very much stands out. And it's something about guys that are able to do it in a matter of steps. You know, it doesn't take much, the little subtleties there, but it's a matter of a few steps for him. So he's not forcing it, and he's not lunging. He's not going out of his way to do so. He just has a keen sense of where he is there in the ring. So it's just a matter of subtleties that keep him in that right range to where he could just step in at a moment's notice to be able to get off his shots, his power shots. And you got to definitely respect his ability in doing such.
Yeah, and it's easier to see on slow motion, like his head movement and his sense of distance and timing is uncanny. But like between like stuffing like we just saw there with his forearms sort of parrying off the strikes. But when look right here, when it's time to bang, Langford is right there with it because he has the chin to do this. And he's the guy with the more power. So Lang's sticking and moving, but every time Lang plants to try, I love that right there. Hits him with the lead left hook and then a right straight to the body. And Langford could wing. He could land very wide punches, but he could also knock people out from like 4 and 6 inch punches. He didn't have to move very much. I love that right there. Lang gets him a little collar tie and lands the uppercut, but Langford's right there with him. So he's trying to bang with Langford. That's a mistake. The video cuts there. Something gets cut out, but then they cut back to that long looping left that knocks him down. Langford gives him space. Now in the U.S. and a lot of the jurisdictions, you could just stand over the guy at this time, keep punching as soon as he got up. Langford's right back in. Ooh, nice little parry right there. And you see Langford landed a jab there, but it did nothing. Langford took the steam off it with his adjustment of his stance, but also he just had the chin. And Lang had sneaked his way into Langford's sparring session and saw him tear guys up. Langford knew he was there, but so I think he was quite. I'm thinking that's a Lang fight that happened. See, Langford's kind of stalking him, but he's stuffing things with his lead hand because his left is such a power punch. But then he can also throw that lead right from where it is. And sometimes Langford keeps his rear foot down on the ball of the foot, and sometimes he does like the Joe Louis, where he lets more like his lead leg's like a fulcrum point, and he lets his back leg come up, get a little bit of extra range, put a little extra weight into it. But you see across the footage we do have for Langford, he could be full of finesse, but he could also just club guys. He had the capability for both. So that's the end of it. And like I said, parts got cut out. And Bill Lang's promoter, Hugh McIntosh, promoted Bill Lang. He also started promoting Langford fights from this on. He was in like their series in Australia, Langford series in Australia. McIntosh was the promoter, but but he's also promoting Lang, so they probably took out some of the worst of the beating. This was absolute bloodbath. We have parts of 3 rounds, so grateful for what we can get. That's a great combo. Look at that. Oh, you see that catch and counter? See, Lang was pushing on him. He digs twice to the body, throws the uppercut. Lang comes back, sticks his hand out. Langford parries it out of the way, comes underneath and lands a lead hook, knocks him off balance. See, oh, he lands the left, but it does nothing because Langford can take it. Plus, he knows how to the feints. Oh, and then the big right hand over the top. Hit him like 6 feints because now Lang's scared of that left hand. He's scared of both hands, so he's messing with his head like that. So that was the end of that. So let me see what this is. That's the slow motion. Do I have the full speed? Or maybe that is all the footage we have of them. There's that combo I was talking about. Look at that. Body, uppercut, and then a parry counter left hook. Look at that. Digs the left, digs the right, throws an uppercut Marciano style, parry, slips underneath it, and lands a left. That is absolute poetry, people. That is expertise. Just grazing with that uppercut. Look at that. That's masterful boxing. And Lang's knocked off balance and back on his bike. Now, how many boxers you see could respond to a left like that, could have it timed out like that, or have the experience, the rounds in the ring in professional setting? That's beautiful. It reminds me of Marciano. Like Marciano, like on the inside work. His whole body, look at that, his whole body's going into each of those punches. And then he steps square. He's waiting for him. He knows he's going to have to throw one of those 2 hands. So Langford literally steps square, knocks it out of the way with his giant arms, and then comes underneath for the counter. I think that's my favorite sequence from this fight. Let's see. I've actually got, what do you say, Josh? Should we load up the slow motion?
Why not? No better way to get a true view than
Yeah,
slowing it down. But I do certainly love what Langford has to offer in this little bit of footage that we do have. You can see that Bill Lang has no true answer for him. As mentioned, the slight subtleties, the way he's able to move his head just at the very slightest angle, a la the likes of Ali when he used to do it with his hands down. But it doesn't take much. It's just having that perfect sense of distance, range, and timing. And you see that at its finest here with Sam Langford. And you do note the feints, and it doesn't take much from that standpoint either, because Bill Lang has so much respect for what he has to offer that Langford, he can just do the slightest of feint, and then Lang is ready to essentially buckle and brace himself for what is coming. And you pretty much know you've won that mental battle if you have an opponent doing such at the slightest of movement. So I'm sure Langford at this point was pretty much in his bag, and feeling he could make Lang pretty much do whatever he wanted him to do there in that ring. And I think Lang at this point, and it didn't take long, has an understanding that he's in with the better fighter, and got to give him respect for trying to give it a go as long as he could. Won't say he, completely back down as some fighters would, or fold under that pressure. So he tried to give it a go for a little while, but certainly Langford, I mean, he just showed why he's a standout.
Yeah, he's crowding Lang, and so even though Lang's bigger, see there Lang even lands punch, but the range is all wrong. Even though they have the same reach, but he's punching down. He's trying to punch down at Langford, who's punching back up at him with the same reach, and that's tough. Langford had gigantic shoulders. Like he was the lighter man, but he was the more heroically built of the two. And you see they're not doing the inside work, but that probably favored Lang as well because Langford was an expert at grabbing you and beating the crap out of you while he was holding on with the other hand. I think it was both fights with the Dixie Kid. He was kidney punching. He was basically holding him with one long arm, and with the other one he was kidney punching him until he wilted. So this probably stretched the fight out. But also this is in a time when, so obviously this one's filmed, but like most of Langford's fights weren't filmed. So giving the crowd their money's worth, like now we live in the highlights age. So the faster you knock a guy out, the more exciting people think of your highlight. But in this day, there were fights with lesser opponents. I don't know if I count Lang as a lesser opponent, but anyway, this was filmed, so it wouldn't count. But Langford would sometimes ask the promoter if they wanted, and if you wanted to put on a show for the fans, or just get him out of there. So we don't know what Langford would have been like if he existed in an age where every fight is on film, and every time the more spectacular highlight, the bigger your brand builds. It's a little different in this time, but in this particular fight, like Langford is a showman. I love that. Showed him the left, showed him the right, then hit him with the left, the lead left hook. So Langford's playing with this guy's brain. Once he respects the power, he's playing with his brain. He has the experience. He's fought everybody. Lang had some fights, but Lang had 44 fights in his whole career. Langford had 44 fights. Let me think. He was close by the end of 1904. I think he had 1 in 02. He had 28 in 03, so it's 29. Then he had 14 the next year. Yeah, so he very nearly totaled him in 3 years, Lang's whole career. So if we're talking about experience, Langford had fought at a high level. Tommy Burns, Jack Johnson, Peter Felix, some other guys. Credit where it's due. Fitz, but he's fighting a guy with all the experience in the world, like just a silly amount of experience. There's only so much you can do. I think this is also slow motion. I think this is the rest of the footage. Shout out to the chat. All right, Andre, peace. Catch that train, brother. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for coming by, everyone, afterwards. Got the towels going. So I think if I'm remembering Lang, was it he fouled out in the sixth in this fight? Yeah, he got DQ'd in the
Yeah,
sixth rounds. So we have parts of 3 rounds. But this was apparently a bloodbath slaughter. So this might be parts of the first 3 rounds of what something that got even worse. And so because the promoter, still had hopes for Bill Lang, so this, for all we know, this is the good parts. This is the part where Bill Lang didn't look cartoonishly overmatched, which he already does. So it's hard to say. See, Langford's holding up his hand like, I'm not hitting you in the clinch. You're not DQing me. But every time Lang's puts his fist, Langford's ready to meet his hands, either meet his hands or parry, like just there with his forearms. Oh, showed him the right, hit him with a big left. So Lang's like, all right, we'll plant our feet and bang. But Langford's good for that. He wants that. The left does nothing. And he's crowding him. Look, he's giving him so little space to set his weight. Oh, lead left. There we go. Smack that right to the body. He's just dissecting this guy. It's much easier to see in slow motion. So a little uppercut there, missed. The lead right. Left, left. Oh, holds off in the right. Left, right. Left. Slips. You see, right, if you watch that on super slow motion, when Lang's throwing back, you can see Langford make these little adjustments to just slip the punch while he's in there banging. He had a great situational awareness. And frankly, he'd fought better fighters than Bill Lang. And he'd fought faster fighters by far than Bill Lang. Like when you've seen punches coming from Joe Gans, Barbados Walcott, Jack Blackburn, Jack Johnson, Joe Jeanette. Well, Bill Lang was good, but he's not Joe Gans. He's not that level of a scientist. He's a good, tough fighter. Big up Rodolfo in the chat. Good to see you here, sir. Just watching a little bit of footage. See right there, that was nice. Lang had his left hand out. Sam just touched his left. Just touched it with his right, and then threw the left hook. Like he's playing with rhythm. He's playing with this guy's head. It's a very tough game they're playing, but Langford knows, and that right hand of his, he can throw it as a lead from where he's using it to block. You see there again, he shows him the right. He's ready to block the punch. He shows him the right and then hits him with a left hook. So whatever Lang does, he's getting a boxing lesson here. His hands are a little bit lower now because he's been eating some body shots. So now he's trying to protect both. Langford lead right. Looks like he slaps the left in low, in the body. Clean breaks. I don't know about you, Josh, but even though the other footages of Joe Jeanette and Fireman Jim Flynn of Langford, I like this one the most because of the rules. They're having to do some very clean work. See Lang using his size there. Langford lands to the body. Lang whips him around.
yeah, I think this provides a good view of just how capable Sam Langford was. Of course, what we would give to have more footage in some of his greatest fights, of course, which either weren't filmed or there's no surviving footage, at least to this point. But I do think that this just provides you a view of Langford and just how much of a showman he was as well. He understood the dynamics of the business, the dynamics of putting on a show. If he truly wanted to press and get a fighter out of there, in immediate fashion, he was very much capable of doing so. So in this case, you know, he just knew he would give Lang a little bit here and there to keep him honest, and I think this is a great footage for as far as just showing just how capable he was, and you get a view of what the mystique was behind him, why he was considered to be the greatest, and it still is considered to be the greatest. You just get a small glimpse of that, and I say it's good to have any footage. You know, there are some great fighters we don't have footage, period. But even footage aside, I mean, you start to understand the stories. You start to piece together, and you can use your imagination in some sense to get a feel for how it was in some of those fights where we get true round by round calls that detail each aspect of a round of a fight, and I think this just adds to that, just having the ability to be able to pull back to something similar to Greb. We don't really have much footage of him. We can see him kind of messing around in a little mock sparring session with Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, but you know the stories, what was written, the accounts during the time, much like with Langford, they were all very real. You know, so it's easy for someone like myself to surmise just what it may have looked like for that person being in the ring, and having this little bit of footage here in the case of Langford, it's not hard to pull from the back of the mind just what it may have been like seeing him at his absolute peak, and how seamless things may have been for him being there in the ring. And we get a feel for just seeing this footage what it was like for a smaller fighter taking on someone who outweighed him by 30, 40 pounds. You know, we have the accounts, we have the written documentation. In this video right here is just a small piece of proof of that. Lang is the taller, bigger, thicker fighter, and that's very clear and obvious. And we have same such video of similar style with other fighters of the past. I love seeing Mickey Walker taking on Max Milling, Jack Sharkey, because it just shows you that yes, these guys were smaller, but they were legitimately moving up to take on the best heavyweights of their time, and they didn't put up the same BS, I guess you can say, or have certain stipulations in place that we would be more accustomed to today if we were to even think or fathom a fighter moving up to take on the best in a division, in two, three, four divisions higher. So I think this footage symbolizes this in a proper symbolizes Sam Langford in a proper manner. You know, and it is a treat to be able just to have the amount that we do have.
Absolutely. It's a joy to have anything. Yeah, and like you were saying about challenging the best, like Langford, his first fight with Sam McVeigh, he was 161. McVeigh was 201, if I'm not mistaken. I tried to do the graphic where they would look about their actual size if they were standing next to each other. McVeigh was, I think, wasn't particularly tall. He was like 5'10 and a half, wasn't he? Somewhere around there.
Correct, but yeah, you're right. You're spot on. Yeah, 40-pound weight advantage uh, over Sam Langford in their first fight, but that didn't stop him from pressing forward and giving McVeigh all he could handle.
Yeah, for real. And McVeigh fought on the retreat in that fight to not bang it out with Langford. Everyone knew, like, don't just go in there punching with this guy who has an insane chin. He's set low. Big up Haplo in the chat. yeah, it's so like, so if he can make a knockout artist like McVeigh fight him on the retreat, Lang fighting on the retreat is different. He didn't set his weight the same way, and he's his higher center of gravity. He's a taller. I think Lang was 6'1", something like that. But all that work to the body, you see Lang start to break down, and then you're not 6'1" because you're hunched over. Suddenly you're 5'11", as far as where your head is, how high is your chin floating. But Lang was a tough fella, but yeah, this was going to be an uphill kind of thing. But this was a big fight for. McIntosh put a lot of money into this. Catered event beforehand, lots of press. The English press were praising how much McIntosh gave them to work with. It made the other stuff seem dry. Like there was a lot of praise about the promotion of this event. McIntosh was a huge deal, as his nickname suggested. But I don't know if he promoted the McVeigh fight in Paris. That was filmed, so I'm guessing he had this filmed. So I'm guessing maybe he promoted that first meeting between Langford and McVeigh in Paris, because he did then promote their second fight of that year, their second meeting overall out of an eventual 15. So he promoted. So I'll have to look that up, Josh, and see if he was the promoter for that, because that would explain why it was filmed. I know for a fact it was filmed because Langford was doing talks over the footage to promote his series with McVeigh in Australia, doing appearances.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it.
Get together, have some drinks with the boys, talk fights over the footage. Sounds fun. But yeah, I think but that would, if I could find one, if there was one piece of footage other than Greb Walker, I think it would be, maybe even over Greb Walker. I want to see this, because that was definitely filmed. 20 rounds in Paris, these two great heavyweights meeting for the first time. They would fight 15 times all over the world. So, they had like 2 fights that year, and they had 4 fights the next year, and then they had at least 1 fight the year after. I can't remember if they fought once or twice in 1913, but these guys met so many times. So, but because of, he hadn't met McVeigh yet, but because of everyone else Langford had fought, a guy like Lang, he was able to kind of, we see in the fight, even though he's the smaller guy, he was able to kind of toy with him. And especially the way he was fighting, like for anyone who's seen, like you were saying about using imagination, like it's a good point. Like, okay, so we can't watch every matchup between these great fighters, but we know the results. We have heavy written coverage, very heavy detailed written coverage of a lot of the main fights. You can often find footage of each of the fighters. So like there's no footage of Langford and Jack O'Brien, Philadelphia Jack O'Brien. But there is footage of Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, and there is footage of Langford from this year, the same year he fought Jack O'Brien. And so you can kind of piece together in your mind, if you know the craft well enough, if you can visualize boxing. The written accounts are fairly detailed, so there is a fairly detailed write-up, at least one, of the Langford O'Brien. So like if you watch each of them fight, then imagine how it interacts. Sometimes that's the best you can get. Same with like Mickey Walker and Harry Greb. There's no real footage of like Greb fighting, but there is as much written about him as anyone ever relative to their time, to the press at the time. I mean, so how he fought is not a mystery. But there's footage of Walker and seeing how he approached both larger and smaller opponents. So like, you just kind of have to piece it together. And that's what we do. We're blessed here to have a fight at all, but there's so many fights I want to have. Langford, years later in 1924, he said this was his fiercest fight against Barbados Joe Walcott. That was back in 1904. He said he never hit anyone as much or got hit as much as in that fight. Now, I don't know if that's the truth or if that's just his recollection of the fight he chose to highlight, because this is 20 years later of being entertained. Langford was a very entertaining guy, so in the days before the fact checkers, sometimes people could embellish, or they would just have fond recollections that may not have matched up to, like, it's hard to say. This book by Clay Moyle does get into that, some, stories, but also like a lot of the factual stuff, and it's extremely well referenced. I've used it to guide my research of Langford. I looked up Basically, he's like, okay, I'm going to look up all the references in this book, as many as I can find. Oh, Haplo, you ain't kidding, man. Greb versus Tunney would be amazing to have on video. Robinson Gallivan, another great one. Yeah, man. I'm not sure of all the different ones that have been for sure filmed, but I'd certainly, I'd certainly go for that, or even this full fight. Like, if I don't know if I assume they probably filmed it all, and this was edited to be like part of the press thing. Langford would do talks over this as well, so maybe this was. But I'd love to get the full one of this fight simply because Langford is so schooling this larger guy. And Lang's at contender levels, like a Australian, champion and then contender level at the world level, but just the way he does it, the ease with which he's breaking this guy down, schooling him. Oh, and Langford Walcott. Yeah, that wasn't filmed, but oh my goodness. Langford Walcott, 15 rounds in New Hampshire. Ref's decision was a draw. 15 furious rounds. So I think, Josh, I'm going to run back. What do I got here? I just got some more slow-mo. Where's that combo of Langford's? This right here. Dig, dig, uppercut, parry, counter left. Like poetry, and just let that run on slow-mo. But it'd be interesting to see some more footage from Langford from the like the other rule sets, like the less, like the Jim Flynn fight that we have is a less restrictive rule set. So they are holding and hitting. They are wrenching the arms. And actually, when they fought 5 weeks same year, when they fought 5 weeks before the fight that we have footage for, Flynn used his wrestling, kept it close. Although there was some speculation that Langford might have been carrying him to get the long booking. Because the one we have footage for, I think it was scheduled for like 45 rounds or something crazy. Didn't get that far, but it was scheduled for it. Yeah, there's the full speed again. But from very early in his career, Langford had, like they said, a very educated left hand. Like, he had a jab. He knew how to hook off the jab and parry punches and block punches. You see in this fight, he's sometimes he's leading the dance of the hands, but sometimes he's just using like touch sensitivity to like mess with Lang's punches, like meet them before it gets to extend his arms all the way out. He's giving him like the little big brother treatment. He's the little guy giving him just be like, he's one step away from being like, why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting, making him punch himself with his own arms. See, even there, Lang leads him over with the one hand and then throws the uppercut, but Langford hits him sends the crossover amid the chaos. Langford was very present in the moment. So even being the bigger guy with more body mass, Langford wants to bang. He wants to slip those big shots and then come up with his own. That was a big left right there he missed. Looked like he stuck him with the jab, landed left hook, and then tried to hit him with like a knockdown left hook, like a big wide one, but missed it. I guess you have to speculate that part of why Langford could stand square like that is because he's so much shorter. Maybe he wouldn't do that against someone who was shorter and faster. But in this fight, or against someone like Genetic, get in and out so quickly and had such a laser jab. But in this fight against this particular opponent, Langford's willing to just walk him down almost square. Not every time, but he is there. He is willing to. I guess partly also the no holding and hitting. He can his midsection is a little safer. He had so much experience by this point. By 1911, he'd already fought a who's who. And then it was just going to get crazier. He was going to meet more guys. Like later in this year, he schools Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, who's past his prime, but one of the great stylists. from the time when Langford debuted. Like Jack O'Brien's 1902 is insane. But Langford got him this same year, drew with McVeigh, met him for the first time for 20 rounds, then fought him again, I think for another 20 rounds in Australia. Some other fights. More of Charlie Burley. Oh, yeah. Got a little chat going on down here. Yeah, but it's hard. It's tough. I don't even know what I go with. If it had to be fights that we knew were filmed, I'd have to figure out all the ones that are known to have been filmed. But that Langford Barbados Walcott fight, oh yeah. If it was, they got the towels going. I'm not sure what the guy's doing there, rubbing his legs, just getting the blood moving. I'm not sure. Like if anyone's seen the Philadelphia Jack O'Brien fight, this thing that Bill Lang is doing, this way of covering ground in the ring, is something that Jack O'Brien was supremely good at. But then Langford, see, he's not standing square. He does come in at that with the angle, but with certain ways that Lang's moving at times, he then walks him down square to just speed up the ring cutting. But this level of footwork expertise, like if you look at where Langford's feet are relative to Lang's when Lang's punching, even in the chaos, like his positional game is so advanced. But of course, he's fought guys who are a lot smoother than Lang. Maybe not as big, but certainly much smoother. He'd fought some big guys. Lang's moving pretty good for a big guy, but see, Langford's giving him no rest. Hands a hard left. See, Lang comes back with an uppercut, misses a right. Langford's just banging right back with him. They cut it off. That's a shame. He must have really been kicking his butt when they cut it off. Lang's like, what am I doing here? In fact, this is this is also from Clay Moyle's book. This is just a fragment of a quote from Bill Lang. This is from like a 1935 interview. He said, after seeing Sam at work, this is from him watching a sparring session where Sam was destroying his sparring. Lang was watching. After seeing Sam at work, Australia and home seemed very sweet. To make sure I did the journey as a passenger and not as freight, I trained twice as hard from that point on. Only one fighter I ever met really scared me. That was Sam Langford. And there are other fighters. I mean, Jack Dempsey said that Langford scared him. I mean, Langford was kind of happy-go-lucky, but it was about what he was capable of in the ring. It was really scary. And the guy's that rough and tumble, but then he's that skilled and experienced, and also stylistically just can switch it up. But that ability to cut the ring and then take what's coming and exploit it and land counters and rip to the body. Harry Wills and others had fantastic things to say about Langford's power to the body. So you look behind you and see if it came out the other side, if the fist came out your back. It's madness. He does seem scared, and from his own words, he was because he got shook watching the sparring, Haplo. Let me see if I can find that quote. If I don't know if he has anything racially insensitive, I'll censor it. Sam showed me all. In fact, he took his 10 minutes to make me a nervous wreck. At that time, he was sparring with Bob Armstrong. He knocked Bob cold in about 3 seconds. He did the same in rapid succession with 3 other sparring partners, with punches that traveled so fast I didn't even know which hands he used. After Sam looked at my way and blew me a kiss. That night, that means Macintosh, asked me what I thought of the Tar Baby. That was one of Langford's nicknames. That imp's not a fighter, I told him. He's a threshing machine, Mac suggested sweetly. he had it. Yeah, his ability to punch, but also it's a speed to power ratio. Just multiplies the danger. And those arms, he's not that old in that photo. I don't think he's particularly old, although you can see he's got the scar tissue on his cheeks, so he's not young. In his 20s, though, probably. Those long, long arms. Then as he got older, his shoulders and his arms got bigger. Wider, But he didn't go up too much vertically. So the kind of power and that gigantic chest, I think when he threw his chest out, it was almost 47. But his resting chest was like 44 inches. That puts him up in the upper reaches of all but a handful of heavyweight champions. But then he's like a little short guy. But that's how he could generate the power and make these guys wary, and then multiply that with the experience and everything. I guess, I don't know about you, Josh, but I think it's a shame that the colored heavyweight championship isn't talked about with the same reverence as what was, for the most part, other than Jack Johnson's reign, the white heavyweight championship that led up to Joe Louis. These weren't insignificant fights, and big fights at the time. There's a shot from one of Langford's fights in Australia with McVeigh. These are pretty big events at a time when this was a big sport, but the colored heavyweight championship that has a rich lineage, including held from 03 till, so I guess 09, it would have been considered vacated because he wouldn't fight Langford in London. But Jack Johnson was a colored heavyweight champion for years. We were mentioning this off air, Josh. Maybe talk about that a little bit. Well, you did mention it, but people think Johnson just appeared when he beat Tommy Burns. You want to mention that for a moment? Rehash what you were saying in the back?
Yeah, no doubt about it. And in relation to the colored titles, and definitely the World Colored Heavyweight Championship, I view them in the same likes, or in the same manner I view those who competed in the Negro Leagues in baseball, and MLB recognizes such, but these were top level athletes. There were two different leagues, but in all actuality, yeah, it was just high quality content. So I view the colored titles in a similar light. But certainly Johnson, he had one of the longest reigns as the colored world heavyweight champion. And to get to that point and to be able to maintain such, he had to go through a gauntlet. One of the things I was mentioning with you, of course, is the mainstream and pop culture connection that Johnson has is everything from the Tommy Burns fight, but everything prior to that point really highlights just how good Johnson was and the level of competition he had to fight to be able to get to the status that he was able to get to. So people had long recognized and mentioned that they felt that he was the best, certainly the best black heavyweight in the world. But yes, one of the best heavyweights in the world, period. And he had put in a lot of work to get to that point where people were mentioning him in such light. And that's nothing to slouch at, nothing to sleep on, because I think that stuff truly defines who he was as a fighter. And of course, we know what he did during his reign, and there was a lot left to be desired, but no question can't deny that he was one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, and he had to prove himself by facing all-time competition in order to get to that point, and that should be highlighted more.
Yeah, absolutely. And Johnson, like McVeigh, started in 1902, Langford 1902. I think Jeanette, what was it, 1904 maybe debut? I can't quite remember, 3 or 4 maybe. But Johnson was fighting at least since, what did we say in our thing? 1894.
Yeah,
So
somewhere around there.
he'd been fighting for a decade. Like, we don't have all of Johnson's fights. They're not all recorded, or they weren't reported. I mean, this is, but what is there is a crazy amount of fights. Let me pull those graphics back up. So this is all fights he had before any of these guys had fought. So that's the stuff through the 1890s that is there. I'm sure there's plenty more that isn't. 1900s, 1901, you see all those more fights. He's done all of that. And then this is the year Langford has one fight. And McVeigh has a few, I think. You see Johnson's already in full swing. 1903, and he's in full swing at heavyweight, whereas Langford was down at the lower weights. 1903, this was the year that Langford fought like Patsy Sweeney and Andy Watson, and first fight with Jack Blackburn, fought the great Joe Gans. So he's fighting down at lightweight, and then 1904, he's fighting at welterweight. But, you know, Johnson's already putting in that work. Actually, I think it's that fight. Yep, that April 16th, 1903, where he fights Big Sandy Ferguson in Boston. Langford's on the undercard of that fight. So Langford had been around and gotten to see Johnson fight live, 10 rounds, I guess, live by 1903. So even though he's fighting at lightweight, he's already seen one of the best of the time. You know, Johnson was coming off a win over McVeigh, so it wasn't like, and Denver Ed Martin. So these guys would, even before there was a lot of video of these things, guys would, if you were in one of the hot spots, which Boston was, you got to see a lot of the stuff if you're there at the fights, and which Langford was. When you're not fighting, if you're making boxer money and you're busy like Langford, you can afford to be at the other fights. Go see what's up. Sometimes step in, which we know him to have done. He's like, well, I'm here. I'll fight him if you need somebody. But anyway, so that's a little just touch on Johnson. We're going to finish on our Johnson thing. Our next installment on that series, we're going to talk about their 1906 seasons. And I know that it's getting a little bit late, Josh. This has been fantastic. Thanks for coming in and having a chat about the footage, about this great fighter and one of the 3 precious films we have of him.
Certainly. More to come for sure. I think this, as we've discussed off air, is a great time as far as where we are with the amount of information that we have out there on great fighters, especially Sam Langford, and him getting more and more attention as time has gone on. And I think that discussions like this, as well as others that you've participated in, and the stuff to come, continues to add to the legacy and continues to show just how great those fighters were back during their time, and allows for them to receive the due credit that they deserve.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully we can do another one of these, do one for this Jim Flynn fight and also for the Joe Jeanette footage. There's a lot of that footage too. But I think, folks, we're going to call it. Thank you for joining us. Just have a little talk. And if you're thinking of getting a boxing book, get this book, Clay Moyle's excellent book on Sam Langford. That'll give you a sense of how epic this man's career was. And also give you a good sense of how epic sort of the heavyweight division was. And arguably, this is the best heavyweight saw until the era of Muhammad Ali. A lot of people who are into the history would consider this to be the second richest era, especially with the schedules they kept, you know what I mean? But anyway, we're going to call it, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. And look for more content. Part 2 coming on our Jack Johnson Sam Langford series, probably within a week or 2. So take care, everyone.